dies. Now Tim is not such a trash. Every offender will be chopped up by his hand. It's not without reason that he decided to do this. The survivors were very scared. They could not do anything to the zombies, especially when Tim became one. They begged for mercy, but Tim's eyes burned with a different desire. They burned like candles in a temple. His smile scared everyone around like the devil. He was definitely ready to leave everyone's hopes on his sharp claws. Clint made the biggest mistake of his life. He left John's girls right in Tim's hands, and if even a hair fell from them, John would destroy everyone. Alice protected Meg with all her might. She covered her with her whole body so that he would definitely not touch her. Tim was already very close. He looked into their frightened eyes. John had to hurry before it was too late. She broke out in a cold sweat. Her fear knew no bounds. No one could have expected what would come into Tim's head. Tim finally turned out to be happy for a long time. Even when he knows about his death, he is happy to take revenge on everyone who has annoyed him in his life. Clint was already running as fast as he could. He had no thoughts of where to run or how far. He ran wherever his legs took him. But suddenly he is stopped by someone's dead hand, whose it may no longer be important. Everyone with that skin color wants to kill Clint. It turned out to be John. If he finds out about everything that happened during this time, Clint will be in great trouble. He was very angry with him. John was ready to drill his angry gaze all over Clint in order to finally pierce his lying heart. He still wondered what had happened during all this time, and how such a plan had crept into his head to distract John and escape far and long. Tim didn't care anymore. The blows on him were pointless. They only did what irritated him and drove him to rage. Alice threw herself at him. Even if she was a fragile beauty, she could easily fight back the crowd of men in the alleys. But Tim will definitely not fall for such naive attacks. He easily catches her leg with the intention of depriving her of the other one so that she cannot kick as before. He squeezed her leg tighter, grabbed it with such force that it would crack any minute. It will not be easy for Alice to get out of his shackles, and she understands this well. Tim is now not the same as before. Now he is a dead man who does not care about death. Now an ordinary person is unlikely to defeat him. Tim is a real madman. He survived even after what happened to him. Anyone would easily accept death and go with it to the afterlife. But he is not like that. He laughs in the face of death and walks away from the swing of her braid from time to time. But Tim completely forgot that John added a good accessory to her. Not only did he become stronger, now she, having 2 legs, can give good blows. Still, for Tim, such blows will be a trifle, like a mosquito bite. Now even a pistol bullet won't kill him. She was amazed by his strength. No matter what blow she tried to throw, he always deflected it. Tim believes that Alice can only be taught something by force, and all because she is trying to fight him on an equal footing. Her willpower is the envy of everyone. Even when her neck is squeezed, she bares her teeth to her opponent. Even if her legs are cut off, she will not stop kicking. Tim is truly cruel. It's not for nothing that he came out of that truck alive. It's not for nothing that he's trying to take revenge. The last breaths of air were gone. She couldn't even say a word. John was too far away. It was unlikely that anyone would help her. Her hands were shaking, but never out of fear. She was shaking due to lack of air. She was not afraid of death. Tim wanted to turn her into a dead man, and only then they could be together. Only then he could achieve her. But she contradicted him. Tim was amazed by such impudence. Alice grabbed his cheek while he was strangling her, and brazenly said that he would not dare to do this. The elder didn't understand why he couldn't do this, why she thought so, why she was so unsure of him. She smiled back at him. Even in such a difficult situation, she did not despair, but only because she knew him well. No matter how cruel he is, there is one weakness of his, one weakness that she will tell him right to his face. The mask slips from her kind and naive look, and she is now the most furious warrior who puts pressure on her enemies only with her charisma. He is a weakling. Tim again left his guard along with his head in a completely different place and lost his eye. Fragile like crystal and strong like steel, it was she who was awarded the phrase that beauty saves the world. It is she who remains strong and beautiful, smart and reasonable, the best woman for the best man. Tim again remained a joke. Alice made fun of him, and he continues to kneel and prove his helplessness. Beauty is no longer the first to save her sister. Even now she manages to accomplish the impossible. Even now she does not let her down at the most inconvenient moment. She orders Meg to save herself and run away from here while her little sister detains this madman. But the most important thing is that Jonah's youngest runs away as quickly as possible. Meg didn't want to leave her friend alone with this monster, but she was categorically against it. She tells her to forget about her and run without looking back. The little sister wiped the tears from her cheeks and ran as fast as she could to fulfill the instructions of her commander so as not to let her down at the most inconvenient moment. Alice looked after her to make sure that she had already left the horizon, so that she was already so far away that no one could track her down. The battle is still not over. She turns her gaze to Tim and prepares to take a new blow. This monster tells her to stop, but now she is unlikely to find a new weak point for him. One wave of his hand and Tim is able to cut off the head of an elephant, leaving hope in its claws. Tim's claw swing was so powerful that it sent Alice flying and off the bus. Tim was already bursting with anger. He was exhaling steam from his mouth like a steam engine. The impact with the ground was not weak. Her back took the full impact. This picture is very tragic. A young girl lying in front of the bus. An incredible tragedy. A mistake by the driver who hit the sweet beauty. She fought to the end. But now she doesn't even have that fire in her eyes. He didn't have that life. She doesn't even have the strength to get up and fight back against Tim. Once upon a time, it lay in exactly the same way, when the end of the world had just come, when the whole world was suddenly filled with the dead and left no chance for humanity to develop. That time, Tim was very scared. His whole face was smeared in blood. But it is no longer known what would have happened to Alice if he had not cut off her leg before it was too late. From the shock of pain, she did not even have the strength to scream. She quietly said that she was in pain. She did not complain and did not interfere with her salvation. All this suggests that she is incredibly strong. Tim was very scared for Alice. She could have died in his arms, but he certainly could not survive the death of his beloved. Tim ordered his six to take off his t-shirt in order to help stop the beauty's bleeding. He instantly snatched the t-shirt from his subject's hands, his hands shaking due to fear of loss. He bandaged the bleeding leg. Only one thing is unknown, whether such first aid will save her or whether everything is in vain. He sincerely hoped that she would be able to recover. He cared for her as if she were the rarest jewel. He touched her face and said that her leg had finally stopped bleeding. This was real luck, even a miracle. He promised her that it was with him that she would always be safe, no matter who stood in front of him. Now Tim was in complete madness. His mind was clouded. He could not utter reasonable words, but it was clear that he wanted to kill her. He grabbed her artificial leg and squeezed it tighter and tighter. Tim tears and destroys everything to smithereens. Even Alice's prosthesis is destroyed into the smallest pieces. Like a wild beast, he rushes at Alice. He is ready to die with her on the same day and take her with him to the afterlife. The willpower has dried up. Now she has lost the strength to survive. All hope remains in the savior who will arrive from time to time. She has already said goodbye to her lover, to her chosen one, with whom fate has brought her twice already, but now she is ready to meet only in another world. How harsh this world is. Even such a beauty is taken away by this cruel fate, which initially gave everything that was most valuable and took it away for no reason. Her whole face was stained with blood. It was unclear whether she would live on and delight everyone with her beauty and strength. Incredibly, she opened her eyes. She survived, yet fate was kind to her. John, as always, is on time, always comes when the situation is already on the brink, when hope disappears but his silhouette calls her back to him. It pierced right through Tim's belly. He was bleeding but did not scream in pain like crazy. Tim, even becoming a zombie, did not become immortal. He is mortal, as before, only the power to fight, like a warrior with several lives, intoxicates his mind, and he does not see the danger in front of him. Seeing a target, he goes to kill it. John now doesn't care who he is. It doesn't matter to him that he is the son of a ruler. John can deal with him as he pleases. Tim can no longer escape from the angry John. Since he is more angry than ever, his intentions no longer have mercy, only the murder of his long-time offender. The long-haired man wants to say the name of his enemy. He wants to whine him, but the virus that has already enslaved his mind has filled his head with fog, and his tongue is tangled over and over again. Everyone was already gathered. They stood behind John and watched Tim's execution. Clint was with everyone, and it was unclear what John would do to him for his initiative. An ideal warrior, without fear of death, without feeling pain, he does not care about enemy attacks. He will always attack the enemy until he becomes a corpse. Tim rushes at John again. Not a single blow will teach him that John is much stronger than any dead man. Every dead man can only strive for his strength. John was well aware of his strength and grunted at every arrogant attack by Tim to mock him. He again begins his show-off speech, which sincerely will never mean anything to him. Everything is decided for Tim. He would have taken his life in any case, even if he had not become a dead man. Tim's rage knew no bounds. He had experienced too much in such a short period of time to leave this world without taking any of his offenders with him. Even here, John is trying to humiliate Tim. He cannot send Tim to the next world without further ado, as a righteous warrior who did not die for revenge against his brothers. John's words again plunge Tim into memories. Again he sees the old silhouette of his main enemy. Then for Tim, it was golden time. He could do whatever he wanted with John. Tim did all this to prove his superiority. He beat John in order to show his power and strength, as if everything was under his control. If he said so, it would be done in the near future. John fell over and over again, but got up and continued to mock Tim's strength, since he understood what motivates Tim when he does such things. Whether Tim was angry, he beat John. Whether he was cheerful and joyful, he beat John. He was not in a certain mood. The main thing is that John's face was ready to take a few more blows. All this so that John would independently recognize his strength in order to assert himself in front of others and rise above John. But John is not a simpleton. He grabs his impudent hand and squeezes it rather weakly, but his intentions to break it were too strong. He called Tim a weakling, and the scoundrel's face immediately changed. He literally froze from such impudence, since hardly anyone had dared to say such a thing to him before. The hero recognized his strength. He believed that Tim was strong and his health was excellent, but only one nuance did not give him unlimited power. The nuance is his cowardice, which he wants to compensate by humiliating the weaker. Even if John has the same health, he can become hundreds of times stronger than Tim, and this amazed the bully. He was shocked that his willpower was so strong. Tim was already tired of listening to his every impudent word. He wanted to squeeze it between his teeth and crush it. John's self-confidence infuriated Tim. He prepared his fist for another but more powerful blow. Since that time, both have changed a lot. As John said, he became hundreds of times stronger than Tim. Tim became a dead man. Only he remained at the same level as before. The main character does not even give a chance to win. Tim can take blows like a punching bag that cannot respond. Tim was confident that he would easily defeat everyone in his new guise, but remained disappointed because he understood that he would die at the hands of the one whom he had always towered over. John didn't even give him the opportunity for a break. Tim no longer had any salvation. He had lost his last hope of victory, since you had to be lucky to become a rival for John. One more blow, which will not be the last, but one day one of the subsequent ones will still send Tim to another world and hammer nails into the lid of his coffin. John, even before Tim's death, tries to teach him something, as if his words even mean anything. Tim was already completely destroyed. His whole face was beaten, his gums were flying out, and blood was flowing like a fountain. John believes that only Tim is self-confident here. Only he fights at the expense of his willpower, at the expense of his pride. He is too strong for Tim. Just one blow sent Tim flying. In the clouds of dust, Tim's face is still visible, which seems to be asking John to hit him, which really wants to take a couple of blows. The character does not resist his desire, and with every step gets closer to Tim in order to finish him off. Tim spat blood. He no longer had the strength to stand up and fight back John, only despair in front of this world. Fate punished him for everything he had done. Now he is destined to die at the hands of his main rival. He was shaking. He was growling like a monster, but John would not be bothered by his pitiful appearance and would not force him to show compassion. Tim, even in the guise of a zombie, began to see danger in front of him. His eyes spoke for themselves. John said that Tim was very tired. He was tired because it was quite hard to take, but he had already taken a person's life. Tim cannot come to terms with all this. John understood all this well, but spoke with a certain mockery in order to finish off all the moral readiness to fight in him. John slammed Tim hard into the front of the car. He was already trying to get up and prepare to fight back. He growled in response to John. He was very angry with him, but more like an animal he fought for territory. John doesn't even allow Tim to stand up. It's too much for Tim to even get to his feet. John remembered everything that happened to him, how all the survivors treated him. When he beat John, John remembered all this, and it greatly ate Tim's heart. John explains to Tim that he, having so many good friends, the one he loves, kind parents, received nothing but hatred. His beloved, who always refused him, called him arrogant, which is why she didn't love him. Meg always hides behind the backs of our beauty and her friend. For her, she is not a criminal back, and for good reason. He did not receive any warmth from all those who praised him, all his faithful friends, loving parents, and so on. Tim ordered John to shut up. He was ready to kill him, but John's leg pressed him hard against the car. According to Tim, John does not understand anything. Everything he says is real nonsense for him. But he is right. Since John does not know his entire life, he does not know what kind of life fate has prepared for Tim. Yes, he had a loving mother who constantly played with him in his childhood. He received the warmth that John spoke about. And Tim had sunny days in his life, and he could feel it all, and his smile shone brighter than the sun in the sky. But no matter how hard Tim tried to hold on to these sensations, they went away and closed the door with a roar. All the good memories were shattered, like a photo in a frame. All these memories for Tim meant only pain, as if these pieces of glass were sitting deep in his head. Well, in the end, everything he tried to protect, everything he tried to hold on, left him. Everything was meaningless. A certain sheet fell, an important document that could mean a lot, but there was nothing good about it. Tim's mother was crying. That paper brought a lot of grief into her life. Tim understood this well. He approached his mother, collected all her tears with his finger. He tried to calm her down and keep her closer to him, so that she would not be completely desperate. She hugged him. Everything seemed to be fine. He tried to calm her down, and she reciprocated. Moreover, tears from her cheeks flowed down onto his shoulders. But what she said completely killed Tim. She regretted that he was born into this world, and these words hurt the most. That's why Tim became so cruel. John will never understand the pain of betrayal. He is nothing like Tim. Even if his family was powerful, there was nothing good about it. Tim makes it clear that John will never be able to find a common language with him. Since he was not betrayed, even the pain of loss will be weaker than betrayal. But even John was able to envy Tim in some ways, yet even John lacked something and had to resort to envy. Tim was amazed by his words. He couldn't believe that John didn't have what he had. As insufferable as Tim was, he had truly best friends who became real brothers to him. From John's words, Tim doesn't feel any better. Before his death, he has to remember the silhouettes of his brothers. They shone against a brilliant background. Their smiles were warmer than any sensations that Tim could get in his entire life. Will, who was the first to give his life for his elder, his younger brother, who made a promise that they would always be brothers. Tim was bursting. He was trembling after such warm memories, since he had lost everyone and all because of a harsh fate that took away a lot of valuable things from many people, from millions of people. John did not stop reminding Tim about his friends. He wanted to teach him something a second before his death. But John tried to convey to him that he himself killed his friends. All his brothers died through his fault, but it was also his fault that they lived to this day. He destroyed his brothers. Now his brothers will destroy him. He is destined to die one day with them, and apparently he cannot avoid this. They attacked him without any thought. They were ready to kill him, even if he was their best friend, older brother, and boss. The whole gang attacked Tim with shouts and screams. No one in front of them saw their own brother. Everyone saw prey that needed to be killed immediately. Tim tried to push them away, but the three of them would easily prevail over one exhausted dead man. He is again sent back to memories of warm days, of carefree times when they could create anything until their youth ended. One of the sixes did not progress and received friendly ridicule from friends. Their smiles shone brighter than the garlands on the holiday tree. That was the warmth that warmed Tim and gave him hope. They always smiled at him, were always happy to see him, and even when he was angry with them, the bros tried to please him. But Tim didn't hesitate to smile and was happy to smile back at his gang of hooligans. They promised each other that they would become stronger in their hobby. But Tim was worried about one thing. He thought that they hated him. Each of them made smiles that even then showed fangs. There was also a lot of unhappiness around Tim. Even the rich and wealthy can be unhappy. That's how harsh this world is. Tim's mother was sobbing and bowing to something. She complained that only the poor and weak could be unhappy, but everything turned out to be completely different. While she bowed to the majestic statue, Tim silently looked at it all. Everything around him betrayed Tim. His devoted friends are now devouring him. He was constantly hiding behind their backs, and now they are devouring him from behind. Pain enveloped Tim's eyes. He could not do anything with his emotions. Nothing. Everyone around him left him alone, no matter how hard he tried to protect him. The girl he loved, whom he compared to a spring field, the beauty to whom he was drawn, also turned away from him. His eyes closed, but from Alice he only received coldness. Even the frosty winter did not bring him such frosty burns. Tim admired her. He always tried to get her attention. Even in a joint hobby, he craved her response. He stretched out his hands to her to ask for help to get to his feet, and she still offered her hand. He clearly lost more than once. She remembered this with an attempt to humiliate him and say that she would no longer train with him. In order to spend more time with her, he wanted a rematch, as he wanted to defeat her and prove that he was capable of something. He was very worried about such a conversation, since she is the true love of his life. He named it after the cherry tree, which meant its endless beauty, which must be preserved forever. Tim asked Alice to become his friend until he defeated her, and all only because he was given to his beloved with all his heart. His heart was captivated by her beauty. But besides, her thorns did not allow him to approach her. Alice was outraged. She didn't like Tim's proposal, and she definitely didn't agree with him. Tim was very embarrassed. He expected responsiveness from her, but he clearly had very, very little chance. As expected from a non-criminal beauty, she asked him to be smarter and not ask such stupid questions anymore. He was afraid of being rejected, but time after time he tried to find a way to get close to her, but everything was in vain for him. But she was too cruel with him. Her gaze cut deep holes in him, which was imprinted on his soul. Her next refusal hit him right in the heart, as if lightning had touched him and sent millions of volts through him. Alice left him and didn't even say goodbye. That's how harsh love can be, since a loved one can heal any wound, but also make it open even more. She looked at how Tim was being devoured. It is unknown whether she felt guilty for those actions. Her gaze was empty. She may have been struck by the cruelty with which they ate him, but she could not come up and help. Tim's pain knew no bounds. His mother betrayed him, his friends ate him, and his beloved did not even give him a chance to show himself. Tim was initially pushed into a corner. He was always lonely, and he lost all the loved ones to whom he devoted his soul. Now he too had fallen. Blood was dripping from his hands. He was to blame for what he had done, but he could not do otherwise. Everything around him stood against him. Everyone looked at such a spectacle. Everyone froze in place after Tim was torn to pieces by a crowd of his own bros. A real tragedy. Everything in the world was proportional. In appearance, he is a real villain. But what led him to this? Whether he wanted it or fate was so cruel that it did this to him. John grabbed Alice. He wanted to calm her down, as he probably felt anxiety on her part. He suggested that she get out of here and get ready to leave this damn place. She had no face, as if she was hiding something, and besides, she simply nodded her head with an air of agreement. Clint was about to climb inside the bus, but decided to turn his gaze in their direction. While he was glaring at them, someone growled from the entrance, which couldn't mean anything good. Clint turned towards the source of the sound. Something really bothered him. Had some of the passengers already transformed? The fears were confirmed. The same boy who suffered from the virus the most had already turned into a zombie and was ready to eat his first victim. Clint began to understand that the situation was very bad for him and no one knew whether anyone could save him. John immediately cast his gaze in their direction, whether he was ready to help Clint after everything he had done, or whether there was no mercy for him. Another couple of centimeters and Clint is destined for death in the guise of a zombie. The baby monster is already flying at Clint and he can only fall down. His gaze reflected nothing but fear, sweat dripping from his face, and a terrifying atmosphere of hopelessness that surrounded Clint. Incredibly, the mother still decides to help her son after so much time. The maternal instinct and conscience awoke in her. She grabs the child by the t-shirt and his short flight towards Clint ended unsuccessfully. Clint fell down. His mother managed to save him. At least once she somehow helped her son, pulled him out of trouble and put herself in danger of death. A trembling ran through him. Opening his eyes with heaviness, he turned his attention to the mother who first saved his life. Clint was greatly struck by the fact that no one except his mother rushed to his aid. Even John, who took the arrow upon himself, stood aside. Mother held this little demon with all her might. It is unknown what could have happened to Clint if his mother had not. Even the boy was amazed that someone could stop him. He opened his mouth wide and drooled while his mind grew cloudy. A real nightmare in the body of a child, he turned his head in the opposite direction, and with his smile instilled horror in his mother. His eyes burned with the flames of death and nightmare. This is no longer the baby as before. Now he is an insane machine for killing and spreading the virus. There is no longer any humanity left in him. Finally, it dawned on her. She saved him at the cost of her life. She was able to prove her love for her son. She tried to reach him with her bloody hand in order to get approval from him. She said Clint's name. Her hand reached out to him, but the shock enslaved Clint and could not release him from the bonds and leave him alone. Contradictions began to play in his head. He could not believe that his mother could save him, but before his eyes everything was completely different. Mother was reaching out to him, but the boy hanging around her neck prevented her and Clint from getting close to each other. Blood flew in different directions. John tore the child from her neck, but it was unlikely that she could be saved. She fell straight onto the cold ground, and she didn't even have time to say goodbye to her son and apologize for everything she didn't have time to do. John grabbed the child's neck tightly. He whined and floundered, but nothing would stand against him. John began to push harder to stop this little monster from infecting even bigger people. Clint helped his mother, but it's unlikely that anyone will help her. Only seeing her off to the next world with all honors will be real help. She tried to say something to Clint, but he couldn't understand a word, and silently stood opposite the future corpse of his mother, and now he was very afraid for her death. Mother apologized to him. It took her a lot of time to prove her love and care. It was not easy for her when her son was wounded before her eyes, when they tried to cut out his dignity. Clint wasn't cold or scared, but his trembling, it was due to a misunderstanding how his mother saved him. When she became so kind, all these questions made his head spin. Clint made the biggest mistake, but he wanted to correct John's mistakes. But now he has to keep the burden of guilt on his irresponsible shoulders until the end of time. His hands were shaking, but he still tried to close the bleeding wound, yet he couldn't help her. All his hopes were in vain. He puts a lot of pressure on the wound. Will this help her? Of course not. The virus will soon spread throughout the body and enslave it. Otherwise, she will die the death of a mother who was able to atone for her debt, was able to protect her son from inevitable death. She said goodbye to him for a reason. She thus said goodbye to Clint once and for all, but he no longer wanted this. The soul was already leaving her body. The tears were drying on her cheeks, but now she was able to repay the debt that had been returning for too long. Clint was ordering her to stop acting like she was before. Again, she wants to just walk away and leave him all alone. She was bleeding. Death was already looking her straight in the eyes. All that remained was to cut off her head with a swing of her scythe. 15 years ago, Clint extended his hand in the same way when he asked for help, but no one gave him a ladder to rise from this abyss. The pain was insane, but the mother did not even touch her child then, yet both parents are guilty of what they did. She languidly said his name as if she wanted the trash father not to hear anything unnecessary, and she could save her son while he was not looking. The hands were almost joined, but the scum of society decided to intervene even at this moment when his son needed help. The trash wanted to drink after everything that this freak had done, and he also incited his mother to run him for another bottle, which she was not happy about. He is a real psycho, because even now he accuses the innocent Clint of nothing, who became a victim of the unfortunate torture of the perverted ruler. The mother did not have her say in this house. What kept her from taking and driving this scum and spendthrift out the door? Why couldn't she help her only son? So she left him again. He was left alone again. While the blood dried on his outfit, his mother ran for a drink. He remembered how she didn't even touch him back then and was very angry with her, but today he can finally forgive her. She had already completely reincarnated and continued to apologize to him, but still she died with pride that she was able to atone for her sins. Then she didn't understand what it felt like when you needed help, and a loved one ran away in fear in order to survive. Now her son abandoned her, left her at the mercy of Fatim and gave her to the dead to die, but now she extended her hand and expected help. Her hands were shaking and bleeding. She tried to reach her son, but it was too late for an apology and everything else. Only death awaited her. Clint shouted at the top of his voice that no one would have wanted to die for his place then. No one would have stood up for him and covered his back. She was still sobbing. The pupils disappeared from her eyes, only terrifying bloody streaks and an empty look. Even her mind was leaving her. Then Clint just needed a warm hand just to grab hold of support, just to give that warmth that was taken from him, but even then he didn't get it. Clint's tears flowed like a river. It was impossible to describe the emptiness in his soul. How many seas of tears he had accumulated. He could have cried days and nights to pour out every drop. He wanted her to simply learn from other mothers, become like them, so that he could boast to his friends what a good mother he had. Now he cannot let her die. His heart does not give such an opportunity. He cannot lose the one with whom he just established contact. He could not say goodbye to the one who saved his life in exchange for her own. John sees how much bad weather Clint has endured. Only his parents are to blame for his character. Not only did they not give him enough, they shed his blood before his eyes. They left in his head the image of his parents as maniacs. The boy greatly bothered John. Even his size did not frighten the boy. As he attacked thoughtlessly, all his actions were based on the virus, strong aggression and insane rage. The virus was to blame. John has already decided to kill him, but otherwise his recovery cannot be achieved. There is no way to save him. He finally squeezed his neck. The boy is dead. Now his soul can calmly go to the heavenly nursery. It can't be. The dead man was not alone on the bus. Apparently all the passengers had already turned into zombies and became slaves to the virus. John threw the imp at another dead man, and he should do something before everything reaches the point of absurdity. He ordered everyone not to approach and stay away from the bus. John was very angry at the whole situation and was ready to vent his anger on everyone. He tore the bumper off the bus and was probably preparing it for a severe thrashing by the walking dead. The others shouted after him, but out of anger, John didn't even hear a single voice. No one could reach him. A certain plan crept into John's head on how to finish everyone off at once, so that the dead would not have a chance to get out of the bus alive. Fuel and short circuit, everything is ready for mass arson. The genocide of a bus full of the dead is ready for action. The flame blazed. Now all the sinners who sold their souls for a piece of dead man's meat are burning in the hellish flames of inferno. Everyone looked at the fire and regretted that they had relatives and friends there, whom everyone treasured greatly. One can only envy John's ingenuity, but still they lost 2 vehicles, and yet they still need to get to the city. Some had their mothers burned before their eyes. Others had their wives and acquaintances. It's a pretty terrible sight when your mother burns alive in agony. They shouted the names of the dead, and in the fire only their ashen silhouettes were visible, burning before the eyes of their loved ones, relatives, and significant others. John began to be accused of burning their relatives. The survivors considered him a madman who decided to commit genocide, but they did not understand one thing, that they were to blame for all this. John pointed out to them that they are the madmen. They are the ones who do not understand what they have done, since the entire bus is filled with the dead, and the only way out for John is to burn everyone in the flames. It seems that he understood what John was talking about. He understood his guilt, which was hidden precisely in him. There and only their guilt lies like a stone on their souls. It is the survivors who are guilty of destroying each other. Everyone here killed their relatives. He understood what his fault was. He knew that zombies could not be eaten. He knew that he could not feed anyone. He saw how Tim and his gang collected zombie meat and could not resist the temptation. The guy said that he gave his mother very little, a small piece, because he thought that she would die. But John listened to everything with a saddened face. They began to understand their guilt. They grabbed their heads and began to sob. No one could hold back their tears. Some lost too many relatives. Many lost children, mothers, wives, and many other relatives. No one could believe their death. Everyone apologized to their relatives for their mistake. The bus was blazing with an orange flame. All the dead were burning to the bones, smoldering in the wind like a cigarette. Their loved ones were burning, and with every second their despair became stronger. It devastated them from the inside and made them hollow. John and the girls were already leaving. They no longer had transport, they had nothing else, they only had each other. John approached Clint. He was killed in all plans. He made a bunch of mistakes. Although with the desire to correct them, he took the lives of half the crew, killed his own mother in order to save his life. The zombie friend looked at Clint with pity. He was silent and watched as his mother choked on blood, and Clint shed one tear after another. He finished her off with an umbrella and sent her to another world, where she would be destined to meet her beloved husband. Clint's gaze was indifferent to everything. There was nothing in his eyes. He understood that John could easily abandon him, leave him alone to fend for himself. But still he asked this question. Clint clearly wanted to stay with John. He asked him if John would continue to be with him, if they would continue their journey. John was very angry with Clint. His intention was not to kill him, but he definitely deserved punishment. John grabbed Clint by the collar but was silent. He was silent for a long time. He had no words to describe his action, to explain to this fool what and how. Clint couldn't stand his silence. He stopped when John pushed him. All his actions were aimed only at getting an answer. Will he leave him or will he take him and ask him for all the mistakes? All these questions were circling in his head. There was no limit to his desire. John remained silent, and Clint made the situation worse and worse with his annoying questions, but still tried to get answers out of him. John was already on the edge. His teeth were baring at him. He was ready to growl at him and swallow him, so that there would be no sound from him, so that he could not create unnecessary problems with his childish head. Our zombie friend yelled at Clint so that he should finally stand up and stop acting like a child, so that he would stop considering himself so special that everyone should bow to him. Clint's stupidity continued as he cried and tried to force an answer out of John, refusing to follow him. Clint has already fallen too low. He cannot let John go. He begged and whined on his knees for him to forgive everything. He banged his head against John and poured out his endless reserves of tears. His prayers had no end, and all just for the sake of John taking him with him. Clint killed his mother, even if he blamed himself. It doesn't change anything. Because of his fault, many people died. If he had not distracted John, if he had not gone so far, they could still have been saved. He blamed his entire behavior on his fear, the fear that made him run away from his mother, the fear that made him take the lives of those people. Someday John will get tired of all this. Someday he will send Clint far away, where he won't have to look after people and lead them. Meanwhile, the bus went out. Ashes and smoke rose into the sky along with the ashes of the victims who died the death of the Vikings. The terrifying silhouettes of some still looked out the windows and left a shiver on the skin, as if a nightmare had escaped into the real world. People stopped crying and sobbing. Their tears would not put out the fire, would not bring everything back, and at least these tears would not even reach their relatives. John was already tired of listening to Clint's nonsense. He understood his motives, but earlier he had already helped people become more useful. They stopped being a burden, but Clint was itching for something. John had no face, no reason to rejoice. It was the most painful thing for him to lose so many people, since he had sacrificed too much to save them. He pulled his hand away from Clint. He had become a real burden for him today. All of John's efforts were in vain, and all because of one mistake Clint made. The zombie's friend explains to Clint that no matter how much he tries to understand him, they are completely different. No matter how much effort John puts in, Clint doesn't care about them. He was very angry. He understood that Clint didn't trust him, but he didn't understand why he couldn't trust him, why he couldn't be patient. Now John's patience has come to an end. He is already at the limit. Since Clint speaks only about his problems, only they worried him. Everyone around him did not matter to him. He didn't understand why Clint was doing all this. John made a promise that he would protect everyone. He made a promise that he would take them to the city. But why did everything have to be ruined after going such a long way? And then Alice entered the conversation. Now it's clear why she was silent when Clint conceived this plan, and all because the city did not exist in the first place. Alice's words completely killed Clint. She clearly said too much. She began to reveal Clint's real intentions. She began to show the dark side of Clint's coin. Alice told John everything, all her hidden intentions. He came up with everything in advance that he would take everyone to the city. But it was all misinformation. John was struck by Alice's words. He could not have expected this from Clint, since he trusted him with all his heart, and he had already bypassed him twice and everyone at once. From his reaction, everything was clear. She said everything straight to the point, but he himself trusted her and told her all his intentions. And he planned all this in order to take everyone not to the city, but to the enemy's lair, so that more people would gather around him who could cover him. Alice angered him so much that he expressed everything he thought about her. He made fun of her mother, and even brought up her family in conversation, which John definitely would not tolerate. Clint is also not going to remain silent. He pointed out that Alice behaved in the same way. She was silent in order to stay with John more often. Even her beloved fell for this offer. Even her greed took over her mind and forced her to go for it, to go for falsehood and carry out Clint's plan. She also began to feel guilty. Clint revealed her intentions. Everyone around turned out to be liars. Clint didn't expect such a betrayal, since they were both at a disadvantage to talk about their intentions, but Alice was still faster than him. He is already crossing the boundaries of what is permitted, and soon John will join the conversation and throw in a couple of affectionate words for Clint to keep his mouth shut. Still, John couldn't stand it, and now Clint will also receive the benefits, of which he has already acquired enough. Really, Brother Zombie was able to give one easy answer to Clint. One blow and silence. What could be better? John's blow struck Clint with such force he had never received from his only friend, but still without force he does not understand anything. John's clap was so strong that it sent Clint flying and gave him a less than soft landing. John understood that in his rage he also exerted extra force. It seemed that he didn't even want to create a conflict, but Clint himself forced it. The brother did not stand aside. He felt guilty and decided to help Clint, since he was truly wrong. Clint threw away his helping hand. Now after this, he doesn't need anyone. John doesn't mean anything to him anymore. The slap was really strong. Blood was flowing from his mouth, and there was a noticeable dent on his cheek. Who is this impudence? Clint can boast of his fearlessness to anyone, since no one dared to spit in John's face in the guise of a dead man. Clint now speaks completely differently. He already hates him more than anyone. What is the parallel in his attitude towards people, when he whines and asks to stay, and when he spits in the face and hates with all his heart? He cried but laughed in response to John. From the outside, Clint is two-faced. All his actions are unpredictable. He constantly does whatever he wants. In Clint's opinion, John had achieved nothing except a loving woman and a child to look after. Despite John, he says that he has nothing to talk to him about. He believes that no one would ever want to deal with John. Clint thinks correctly, but skeptically. He believes that everyone in this world is trying to get ahead of the other. In pursuit of the dead, you just need to be faster than your friend. John didn't like Clint's thoughts, but he remained silent. He did not interrupt Clint, since he had probably already prepared his answer. But still, Clint didn't understand why he hangs out with weaklings. Having such strength, why doesn't he leave everyone to their fate? John's answer was quite short and clear. Everything he does is because his parents were ordinary people. Clint was amazed by the answer, but he didn't fully understand what John meant, what kind of family he was talking about, what it meant to him. John's parents were ordinary people, like the answer of a small child, but what this answer carries is of real value. Clint will never understand what John tells him about his family, ordinary people who had sincere love, sincere warmth and joy. And Alice was hurt by these words. For John, the death of his parents was a turning point in his life, and she understood it well. Still, John's parents became zombies before his eyes. They ate him while he felt everything. But once they smiled brighter than the sun, he could feel their warmth. And the younger sister is also ordinary. How can he abandon such a cutie, even if she is ordinary? How his conscience will allow him to deprive her of attention? Alice, his beloved, is also an ordinary person. What could make John leave her halfway? All those people whom he has protected so far are also ordinary people. Each of them is ordinary. And now how to come to terms with the fact that they will no longer exist, as well as with the death of their parents, will regret it for the rest of their lives. That includes Clint himself, who himself made John feel special. Aren't they all simple people? Each of them is ordinary, but John, by the call of his conscience, cannot leave them. He is the only person among them all. Everyone understands that in order to live in comfort, one must become stronger, but still the strongest bear the most responsibility. In the first half of my life, when everything was normal, when the end of the world did not come. John was constantly beaten until he bled by Tim and his gang. He could never fight back even one of them, and he never had a chance to compete with the crowd. While he was being beaten, he could not respond with anything, and the only way to emerge victorious was an insidious trick. His eyelids opened with heaviness, his strength left him, and any minute he could find himself in the world of dreams. Tim and his six were truly cruel. As they beat him until his fists bled, it was clear that this brought them incomparable pleasure. Tim's smile was very sinister, but John couldn't do anything to him. It was all because of his connection and his father. Even Tim himself said that John should not come up with anything unnecessary and keep his mouth shut, otherwise his family would be in serious trouble. John understood the situation he was in. He could not answer anything, since his parents were ordinary people who could not defend themselves in any way. Brother Zombie points out to Clint that he can't even contemplate the idea of leaving someone. The point is not that he can live in complete peace, not that he is destined for an easy and measured life alone. Throughout John's life there were bright moments. There was happiness and joy, but grief, despair, and tragedy also found their places. John suppresses anger for a reason. His whole character has its own catch. He endures all this not in vain, but for one purpose. The reason for all this is incredibly simple. There is nothing difficult to understand that John is doing everything for a bright future. After another bullying, interrogations awaited him at home. His parents were eager to find an answer. His little sister constantly looked at all his wounds. They were worried about him, but he couldn't tell the truth. He had to constantly lie and avoid answering so that Tim wouldn't touch them. He was always silent in response to them, but someday they would have suspected something and would have definitely gone out to investigate. Still, they decided to go to school to find out if he was being beaten there, which is exactly the truth. The parents smiled again and wished John all the best, even offering him dinner like real parents. He always wanted to protect them. His lies were a way of protecting them. He always did everything for their benefit. John wanted to protect their warm smiles, their joy and happiness, to watch and even admire their sincere kindness and humanity. All John needs is to protect ordinary and inconspicuous people who, together, like a puzzle, put together a harmonious picture. His words amazed everyone. Everyone was touched by these words. Since the survivors could not hear anything better, everyone expected John to demand benefits from them. These are the values that drive John. This is what John sought in order to hammer this into the head of Clint, who always wants to be alone. These bright images for Brother Zombie were the most valuable in his life, and they are truly beautiful. Every smile warmed him more than the hot sun. John simply must see all this again. These bright smiles must flash before him again, which warmed to the depths of his soul. Even if he cannot go back to the past, even if everything cannot be returned as before, but happy people who will walk along the alleys and give sunny smiles to this world. Every survivor burst into tears at John's words. No matter how simple they were, they truly touched and warmed everyone around them. John still has hope that there will be a person like him in the world who can find true happiness. People survive only so that the world is ruled not by the dead, but by ordinary people. For John, there is no choice, since wandering around the world completely alone is not at all in his mind. John points out that the death of his mother was very scary for Clint, since they only managed to make peace. This kind of thing kills you inside. Clint won't be able to come to terms with his mother's death after what she did. Finally, Clint's memories began to bring him warmth, and his mother's smile was no exception. It was no longer possible for him to hold back his tears, since he was wrong from the very beginning, but John should have explained this much earlier. The brother fell silent. He was finally able to convey to Clint about real values. Clint refused his words, but his face spoke of something completely different. He was sobbing and well aware of his guilt before everyone. Even if John's words are truth, dogma, it's all meaningless in Clint's opinion. After her death, Mother did not think that she would be able to repent for everything she had done. What is the value after such salvation when you die, having only recently atoned for your debt to your son? John now listened to Clint about how he was alone all the time and never felt any warmth from someone's side. Throughout his entire thorny path, Clint had never experienced such precious happiness. He wiped his tears and said that it would not be difficult for him to continue to remain lonely without any happiness. John grabbed Clint's head between his hair and prepared him for a man's embrace to soothe his soul. A masculine act on John's part. Even after everything he had done, he accepted and forgave his mistakes. Even the men were moved to tears. Each one poured out streams, rivers, seas of salt water, and yet there was only one serious conversation. Even Leo, an adult doctor, did not stand aside and could not help but shed a tear from such warm words towards all people from one intelligent zombie who has much more humanity. But something suddenly distracted him from all the misfortunes, from everything that happened and from all the warm words. Incredibly, a military helicopter flew over the tops of the mountains. Does this mean that the city is very close? Leo immediately changed his expression. He was very surprised by the sudden appearance of a helicopter on the horizon. Clint and John also paid attention to him. Apparently, salvation had overtaken them. They would finally be able to avoid the next bad weather. No zombie could fly a military helicopter. Only a human could save them. The helicopter driver reported to his headquarters that no people were found within a radius of 10 kilometers. Really, a real person who can pull everyone out of this abyss of failure. He requested permission from headquarters for a return flight in order to return to the city. John looked after him to find out in which direction the city and the people who were saved in the same way. No joy was visible on the brother. As if he was already ready for this, he simply calmly dragged his beloved towards the helicopter flight. The survivors immediately forgot about their affairs. They hurried towards the city in order to finally escape. They had traveled too long to get here, lost too many, and finally got there. This is exactly what happiness looks like for survivors of the apocalypse. An oasis in the middle of the desert, real civilization. All roads led to it, and even more so the air route of a helicopter. And now you can breathe a sigh of relief. Everyone got out to the road and were already running, headlong in order to quickly get protection from the city. Everyone rejoiced. Everyone was able to go through this difficult path with blood and sweat. Many left behind the lives of relatives and significant others, but were still able to get closer to salvation. They decided to settle down in a clearing before heading into the city and began to prepare to enter it. Sam pointed to something that struck him so much he literally began to shine, because in front of him was something that can only give joy. He saw survivors making their way into the city through crowds of military personnel, and everyone was allowed inside. They were screened by the military before entering to ensure they were not infected. Everything around began to shine. All misfortunes were behind us, which means we can celebrate and rejoice with all our hearts. Only Clint was not happy about his arrival, and there was only one reason that made him uncomfortable. The ruler of the city was a real freak, and nothing could be expected from him. For an unknown reason, they set fire to the torch, which motivated them even if night fell. It is always possible to find a better source of light. Now everything is clear. A torch is different from a dead man. Zombies are afraid of fire, and this makes it easier for the military to understand who is dead and who is human. And the connection started working. You can immediately see that it is not far from civilization, which means salvation is not far away. The phone caught the signal, and it wasn't even a moment's joy, since a smartphone is already an irreplaceable thing in the world. Everything in this world is not just a coincidence. It was not just that he was able to find a phone, and this helped him a lot. The guy changed the SIM card in it, and it started working again like a Swiss watch. Since the boy did not save anything, and even deleted the photographs, he did not have a single photo and not a single memory left. This upset him very much since he had lost everyone and he couldn't remember anything. The zombie brother could understand the survivor since relatives and memories of them are all the most valuable. Joy gave way to sadness. What a fine line there is before these states and how terrible the pain of the absence of memories. John doesn't know why he needed this guy's phone. There is no one to call him. All his relatives are right at his fingertips. The boy could not expect such a request from him, but his conscience would not allow him to refuse. John was ashamed to ask him for something, although he could ask anyone here, but his sense of justice does not allow him to do so. But the young man is not so pitiful, and without any pity or greed, this is sincere gratitude. John didn't even expect such a kind reaction from him, since he was sure that it would be much harder to beg for a smartphone from him. But still, the smile indicated that he understood that it was not all over for these people and that future generations could be safe. After such travels, people truly begin to value their own life, and the one who saved it will be a kind of deity for them. The stars shone between the trees, and John, who knows why, needed Clint, who probably wasn't expecting him very much. Clint finally noticed his presence and was able to pay attention to him. Clint pointed out to him that he would be going into town, and John knew that better than anyone. John also knows what kind of person was really hiding behind Clint's mask, what his nature was and who he was. From the very beginning, John was right. He was almost always right in any situation. His every word meant the truth, which must be believed without evidence. Clint made it clear to John that he realized that they were completely different. Initially, there was nothing similar about them, and this was not at all pleasing. But John doesn't need boring conversations at all now. In the middle of the conversation, he called Clint's number, and that's why he needs that guy's phone number. Clint was surprised by John's suddenness. Maybe he couldn't have expected John to know his phone number. He asked him to save the number, since now he has a phone and he can call him at any time or report danger. John was alarmed by something in the city. He asked to contact him if something suddenly happened, and this city was the real lair of the main enemy. If Clint ever forgets his number, he can ask the person he was traveling with for it. Clint didn't stop screaming at John's back, but he was unlikely to respond to even one scream. Clint wasn't sure that the city existed, and he couldn't be sure of the safety of all the survivors while they were in the city. He asked to leave him alone and never appear in his life again, but all his emotions spoke of the opposite. He thought completely differently. He understood that John would no longer want to see a man like Clint, would not want to deal with him under any circumstances. Alice and Meg were waiting for John and wanted to get out of here as quickly as possible, so as not to meet again with this pathetic child in the body of an adult. Alice partly felt guilty, and that she was also to blame for their separation, since it would be difficult for John to recover from such a betrayal. Clint screamed and screamed, but John did not pay attention to him, like a parent who, when offended, begins to remain silent, giving him the opportunity to understand his guilt himself. John was about to leave without exchanging a few words with Clint. He picked up Alice in order to carry her away from here. Clint kept shouting to attract attention to himself, which could not be won in any way. The brother took his sister by the arm, carried Alice in his arms, and silently left, leaving the horizon. If suddenly the city didn't exist, Clint asked John to take him with him on a big trip where everyone would finally become friends. He stood there for a long time and waited for an answer from Brother Zombie, but he didn't get anything. With each step, they got closer to the horizon and left Clint's horizon without saying anything. Alice decided to turn her gaze to Clint. He was filled with curiosity about what she wanted to see there. Suddenly, John stopped. Did he really dare to find the strength to reciprocate Clint's feelings, which means only one thing: they can have many new adventures. Incredibly, John stepped over his pride and allowed himself to give Clint a chance. But will it be as bad as they think? There was some fear in Alice. She turned to him, but it is unknown what bothered her so much. John smiled sweetly back at her and said that they would go look for a new home, which for their entire little family meant only a happy future. Those words touched Alice very much. Salty water flowed down her cheeks. They did not stop flowing down, like a waterfall, the most beautiful waterfall of tears of happiness. She wiped away her tears and sweetly agreed with such an excellent decision, since she was very scared that he might leave her at the end of this path. Meg's joy knew no bounds, and Alice did not know where to go after such a sweet confession. The beautiful moon shed its pale light on people, but the fact that it is full suggests that unexpected events await our heroes. The same wanderer with whom John is still obliged to meet, and the one who is somehow connected with the city, and most importantly with the ruler, with Tim's father. That creature was truly terrifying, and it was exactly what Tim called a man. According to the stranger, this monster was very tired and was also badly damaged after some work for some family. The wanderer was looking for someone, and this search brought him a lot of problems, since he would be very angry if he did not find his goal. That creature had human faces on it. That's what scared Tim so much then. It was this monster that was hiding in that mysterious truck. The stranger could talk to this monster and even reacted to its aggression with laughter. If this creature is a side effect of the city's experiments, then what could be waiting for our heroes at the entrance inside? The wanderer noticed nearby that the dead were greedily eating someone, but it took him a long time to realize what was going on under his nose. He decided to pay careful attention to them and even got up from his corpse car and rushed towards the zombies. It can't be how lucky he was to once meet a gang and even Tim himself, whom they devoured. The Wanderer again shows his gigantic strength, and it amazes again as he throws two with one kick soaring in zero gravity. Still, he found what he had been looking for so long. Everything was written before his eyes, like an open book. You can read everything about him. It's not for nothing that the eyes are the mirror of the soul. It seems that even signs of intelligence were able to remain in Tim. Since his eyes were not empty like those of the dead, he could still think. The stranger looked at him clearly and examined him completely from head to toe. The chains and handcuffs in which he is shackled haunt him, and the bandages with which his entire body is tied are even worse. From his cloak he began to pull out a certain photograph. Surely that family would be Tim's family. He brought up the photo and compared the dead man's body with the photo of the one he was looking for, and it would be really bad if Tim was the one he was looking for. All fears were confirmed. The Wanderer is directly connected with the ruler, and it is for his family that he works. He still found it, which means Tim still won this battle with John, since he was able to get out of this situation unscathed. It turns out that the stranger had previously known Tim, and yet they had not seen each other for a long time, which is why he almost did not recognize him. They were supposed to see each other for the last time before his birthday. It can't be that the Wanderer called Tim his older brother, but Will had been killed a long time ago, and that's exactly what Tim couldn't believe. The younger one asked him to shut up and not piss him off by saying that his brother had been dead for a long time, and that he no longer had any brothers. He didn't want to spoil his good mood, which is why he shut Tim's mouth in advance so that he wouldn't say too much. Good treatment from the Wanderer still needs to be won, so Tim will have to be a good boy to win his love. He pulled the gloves onto his bound hands and confirmed everything by saying that they were still one family. You can't quarrel from the very beginning. First, you need to make friends, and later you can quarrel like a child. Initially, it is necessary to break off relations with Tim, but for what and why does he need the needle? Will Tim really become part of this united creature? Suddenly, the monster began a dialogue with the Wanderer, and he immediately noticed their intervention. They said something incomprehensible that only this strange stranger could understand, who was unusually strong and had a character unlike anything else. Everyone's faces became too conversational. They seemed to be humming something like an orchestra. The stranger pulled out a thread and a needle, as if he had not prepared them for knitting, or Tim would become his new material. He threaded the needle, which could not mean anything good for Tim, since he would be the next product. He was very scared for his life. He didn't even manage to save himself. His father is a real psycho, since he even allows such things to happen to his son. The survivors were already approaching the gates and each had torches, which together shone much better than any lantern. The military man noticed a crowd of people in the darkness in front of him, but torches really helped to see them in such darkness. Leo was responsible for everyone and led and in front, and also accounted for them all. The military man does not lose his vigilance and takes a stance to react to an attack or enemy. The people here are unusual, each equipped with different technologies to analyze their enemies or allies. Apparently, they were able to pass the selection, and the passage will be open to them. After all, doctors are very valuable at such a time. Everything in this city is very serious, and at such times you always need to be on alert, and so are the military in the city. The man forwards all the received data and asks for permission to enter to these people. His look is very tired. Could this indicate something bad that is happening in the city? Finally, the gates to the city are open to them, and they will be able to escape from the crowds of the dead. Everyone froze in front of the gates, as if they had entered the afterlife, and the guardian of the scales gave them passage to heaven. The watchman let them inside, which would have been real happiness, but something haunted them, that creature that worked for the ruler of the city. The survivors did not expect such a simple entrance to the city and froze a little in surprise, since they had experienced a lot during the time they got here. The watchman was tense at this reaction, but Leo calmly decided to finally enter the city. Some were jubilant, others were happy, and some were grateful for the warm welcome. Clint felt uneasy entering the city of someone who mocked him 15 years ago and brought everything to a terrible absurdity. No matter how hard his legs walked, with every step he was closer and closer to the entrance. Still, he could not walk without one zombie friend and constantly turned back to suddenly see him. The others called out to Clint to hurry up and enter the gate faster, otherwise it might be too late. Still, he hoped that he and John would still be able to meet. But would everything be so bright and colorful in such a civilization? It was very difficult for Clint to enter this place, and every step was harder, as if he were chained to the car and dragging it on his hump. The full moon did not say anything good. There was complete distrust of the city due to strange incidents with the Wanderer and the Ruler. Transferred to John and the girls, John still cannot forget Clint, and from time to time he remembered him and everyone else. Alice made the right point. If Clint doesn't write, that means everything is fine, for now. Meg understood that John was lonely without Clint, and just asked him a question on this topic. There was never a drop of self-interest visible in her eyes, and her smile was always the most sincere. She hit the bull's eye with her question. John missed Clint greatly, his whining and everything that was in him. Even if the question was a tricky one, John was not angry with Meg. If another person had been in her place, he would have reacted the same way. He pointed out that Clint had already chosen his future path, which meant only one thing: everything would be fine. Our zombie brother was worried that he might have taken his girls with him in vain, since the city could have been much better. And suddenly John turned his attention to Alice and still understood that she had no other choice but to lie so that John would not leave them in the city. Alice will not allow John to leave them, even if he is not eager to take them with him. They will not care about his decision or who he is. Stupid John was still conflicted about this, and it bothered him greatly. Alice is much stronger than all of John's enemies, since she can stop John with one movement of her finger, which she often uses so that John does not say too much. In her opinion, people long for a new life in order to lose and forget about the old sufferings that torment with their presence at the present time. Alice's words amazed John. Now both are able to throw around beautiful words. Having lost a loved one, people begin to look for a replacement in order to lose the pain of loss, but they have not yet been able to lose John, so they are not going to look for a replacement. Her sincere smile is much more pleasing than her absence, and until this moment John may not have realized this. Appearance is not important to her. What is important to her is that, having become so strong and powerful, John remained himself, without changing his priorities. She pointed out to him that he couldn't forget the past, so why should they forget about it? They should continue to cherish happy moments and come to terms with the bad ones and throw them out of their heads so that they don't interfere with their life now. Our brother couldn't say a word. He was amazed by Alice's kindness. He froze like a stone, and she caressed him so that he would calm down and live as he is. Eli was confident in her abilities and could definitely protect him from all dangers. John was behind a stone wall. Together they made plans to raise Meg as if they were their daughter, which she was very, very happy about. Even if they can't have children because of John's body, our beauty doesn't see anything wrong with that. John was confident in his abilities, and everything would have worked out for him, and everyone believed in him that way. Any minute now she will laugh with all her soul like a child. As expected, John has become himself. She is good at calming him down and distracting him from unnecessary thoughts. After such a shame, John felt ashamed for a long time, and the girls added fuel to the fire with their laughter. Still, we were transported to a majestic city with an ill-fated ruler. The survivors set foot somewhere, and nothing foreshadowed trouble. Everything even turned out very well. Still, someone was watching them, and it turned out that there were 2 people missing from that crowd, and it was Alice and Meg. Incredibly, the ruler and his subordinate discuss all this and remember that those people will be food for some livestock. Everything was terrible. Tim's father was a real madman, and his son was not far off. Even such a businessman was forced by something to get up from his chair and go to the cameras, to look at one handsome man whom they had not seen for a long time. Even after so much time, he did not forget about him and waited a long time to admire his beloved boy again. Even now he considered him handsome. His mad love for children was terrible. It was not for nothing that he did such vile things as his son. The ruler saw a lot of energy and sensitivity in his eyes. All this made his animal instincts awaken. Clint is like a barrel of wine, only becoming sweeter over the years, and only this pervert has such feelings for him. He wanted to see something that over time interested him even more. He wanted to know the reaction of the weak animal who had lived in the darkness for a long time, and he would plunge it there again. The guard opens the gate for the survivors, and apparently the feeding has already begun. The worst is for dessert. The crack in the gate emitted a strong light, and it was this light that Tim's father was talking about. The gap became wider and wider. The light became very strong, what was stored behind these doors. All the people were blinded to the point of burning in their eyes, and no one could see anything in the rays of this radiance. Smoke dispersed throughout the room. According to the ruler, the people's reaction would be darker than he could have thought. They had broken through all his perverted expectations. Leo was in shock for a reason. He was scared. He didn't understand what was looking out of that door. It was a real nightmare, the likes of which they had never seen before, one that could destroy all hope for the further development of civilization. This is the real horror in everyone's life. The white chalk circle on the floor will not save you from this. Such evil spirits, which were kept locked up, will reap all the survivors any minute. Clint was petrified. Did he really not expect to see something like this? Although, yes, he had never seen anything like this. This is a real horror for him. The reaction was truly gloomy. This is what kind of cattle our ruler has. This madman turned out to be an experimenter, like Tim. This is exactly what he wanted to see. Such a reaction was priceless to him. He laughed evilly, like the main villain. Yet the city turned out to be the lair of the enemy of humanity, who wanted to achieve immense power through experiments. Millions of people had already fallen into his trap. Each one was given over to be devoured by the dead, and he considered each one a naive friend. At the same time, John was putting Meg to bed. She finally went to bed. Clint didn't call them. Everything was calm for them, but that creature that stuck its hand out of the gate gave no rest. While their friends and acquaintances are dying, they just want to have fun when their little sister lies very nearby. They have almost touched their lips. Finally, everything is fine with them. They are together, and everyone is happy. But suddenly they are already interrupted for the second time, but still John calls Clint and calls them to his place. The brother raises the smartphone closer to him and realizes that his fears have been confirmed. It can't be. Clint is in complete danger and he urgently needs help. John already needs to hurry. They were put into a cage and perhaps they will soon be experimented on or simply sent to feed the dead. They fell straight into a trap. John himself put everyone's lives at risk and also almost set up his girls. The dead were already greedily reaching for their future food. Their number was amazing. They had clearly been collecting them here for a long time. He is completely satisfied with his actions. A real villain who made everyone understand how harsh the world is in the apocalypse and how no one can be trusted. But it's too late to say anything. John and Alice were already preparing to flee without helping their comrades, since they promised them that they would get them out of any trouble. The shadow of the city, a cruel father, a tyrant ruler, a pervert with a terrible character and a madman when he was appointed to the post of ruler of the city, no one thought about anything. The saviors of this city have already arrived and are ready to administer